Ed Sutton is a Charleston businessman, a resident, a military veteran, and a Citadel graduate. And now he wants to help represent the constituents of South Carolina House District 114 in Columbia. I sit down one-on-one with Ed for a special edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And be sure to download the free Quintin's Close-Ups app in your Apple or Google Play stores. Listen to this interview Wednesday on my free Quintin's Close-Ups iHeartRadio podcast. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel.
Ed Sutton, welcome to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you.
You're so welcome. Obviously, you are a small business owner, a decorated veteran, and a low-country family man. He is running, meaning you, to represent his low-country neighbors in the state legislature, pitting his sterling leadership credentials, deep South Carolina roots, and fierce passion for civic engagement to work for the Palmetto State that raised him. Talk to me about your sterling leadership credentials, because obviously you're running for South Carolina House District 114.
Sure, absolutely. So my leadership credentials are largely based through my military experience. I joined the Air Force, commissioned to the Air Force one day before graduation from the Citadel, and I've been an Air Force pilot for the last 14 years. 9 of those years were active duty, and the last 5 have been as a reservist here in Charleston. So through that experience, I've been able to lead small teams all around the world, which is an absolutely incredible experience. And through that, I'll say that my passion, obviously I joined the military before I had a passion of service for my country, and now the next phase of life, trying to transition that passion of service to a local community here in Charleston.
Why now?
Right now, we've got a lot of issues that are facing us. Charleston is changing rapidly. We've got a lot of folks moving here. Our employment opportunities are expanding. We have a couple crises as a result of that, is affordability, especially right here in downtown Charleston, and then also sea level rise, which is causing increased flooding here in Charleston. So there's a lot of new challenges to this area that we need fresh voices of leadership to face and tackle those problems.
When you are driving around House District 114, what's in your rear view mirror?
Sure, probably one of the most immediate issues in 114 is traffic, especially along the 61 corridor. Anyone who's driven that during school hour times have seen that it's just the only way to describe it is a nightmare. The road is way overutilized, and we need to kind of put a direct focus on what are we going to do about 61, how are we going to improve this. And we know it's a historic highway. Those oak trees cannot be disturbed. The road cannot go wider, so it really becomes a efficiency question. How do we more efficiently use this road? And I think a concept along the lines of something like the BRT that's being proposed from Somerville to downtown, right, connecting to that spur would be one solution, but there's plenty other ones out there that how we look to make 61 more efficient.
What are your solutions?
I think the BRT, finding a way somehow to tie into that would be one. Another one would be looking at the Glenn McConnell extension there. Having another road, of course, to alleviate the congestion on 61 would certainly help. That's still very much in the early phases of development. Of course, there's been a lot of feedback on how that's going to be routed. So there's, I'll say for the Glenn McConnell extension, that is for the large part a blank slate, and would like to have a greater voice in deciding how we're going to develop that road and how we can look to use that to alleviate other traffic problems in District 114.
District 114. How would you take that feedback to Columbia?
Columbia, I think a lot of what a job of a legislator is, I'll say, a bit of salesmanship, making that pitch for how is this for the greater good? How does this benefit not just the district itself, but the state of the whole? So that's really the job, or I'll say my job as representative, is figuring out how to make that sales pitch and getting the state to, of course, chip in some more money to make these projects happen.
Let me ask it a better way. How much confidence do you have in the South Carolina Department of Transportation?
I do have confidence in there. I know the DOT gets a bad rap, partly because they're not equipped to basically tackle the challenges that they've been presenting. So when the penny gas tax was passed a couple of years ago, at some point they snuck in a rule in that legislation saying that the Department of Transportation couldn't hire any additional employees after the gas tax is passed, which is a huge problem because overnight the amount of projects that they were responsible for doubled and then tripled, and then they couldn't have, they don't have the ability to bring on more folks folks to look at these things. So by structure, DOT is quite frankly handicapped, and that's something that we need to look at, is allowing those guys to bring in more resources to tackle some of the road problems. But also from a structure point, I think it is important that we kind of modernize our overall approach to how we look at roads. Most other states across the country, road control is primarily at the county level, because it's a lot easier to reach out to your county councilman and say, hey, we've got a problem here. This is something that we need to look at. We've got potholes out here. What are we going to do about that, versus a statewide bureaucracy? Because we all know trying to get a bureaucrat on the phone is about impossible. It's like trying to get a live voice on the phone at Comcast. You just can't do it. So I think so those two structure points I mentioned, allowing DOT to bring on more resources, manpower resources, to address the projects they have, but also bring some of those projects down to the county level.
How much resources does SDDOT need right now in your mind?
I don't have an exact number for that. I would have to, really kind of depends on what things we're going to decide are priorities here in the whole country. So to give you an exact number of how many folks they need to go out and hire, or contractors, I don't have that.
Now, talk to me about potholes. How many potholes are in House District 114?
Potholes aren't necessarily a major issue out there. Probably the biggest issue transportation-wise is still just the traffic congestion. That's really where the focus needs to be.
And I know a lot of people's focus right now is on the mass shootings that have happened in this particular country.
It certainly is.
And I know that you basically commented on that just recently on your Twitter page, right after the Associated Press tweeted out information about the Dayton, Ohio shooting. You said this: doing nothing changes nothing. 80% of South Carolina Republicans and Democrats favor closing the Charleston loophole and mandating background checks. If you want to make sure we put an end to mass shootings, ask your state rep where they stand on these two very popular and common sense proposals.
Yes.
Where are your proposals?
So exactly right there. You can definitely tell by the tweet where my thoughts lie on things that we can do. One of the problems, and not just in our state but our country, when we say guns, everybody runs to their corner and then nothing happens. And that's exactly what's been happening, or that's been the trend for the last decade is nothing. We've had mass shootings here in our own community, across the country, and there's been zero terms and zero change, I should say, and gun safety rules. So the two that I mentioned are incredibly popular in South Carolina. That study came out of Winthrop in March of this year, and it said 80% of Republicans and 83% of Democrats support closing the Charleston loophole, and then also expanding universal background checks. And any time that you can get both parties in the state to 80%, that's incredible. That's an opportunity that should be seized by our state legislature, is to push that. The other case to be made there is, and I've kind of already hit on this, is at our national level, it's just gridlock. We're not getting much out of there. So there's another opportunity for state legislators across this country to kind of step up and fill that leadership void. So when we talk guns, there are two pressing things right here in front of us right now that the state as a whole agrees need to be done, and we need to explore those options and push on those options to do something, because I think we are, 80% of folks believe that this is a good solution. Well, 100% of people agree that mass shootings need to be a thing of the past, and we need to do something to address that.
How many voids are left in this?
I'm sorry, say that again?
How many voids are left when you think of gun legislation?
Voids. I'm not sure. I know what you mean by voids.
I know you just said there was a lot of voids in the gun legislation.
Oh,
how many are left?
Voids. A good no. I don't have an exact number off the top of my head for the number of voids that are out there.
Let me ask you this: if they were to call the South Carolina State Legislature back to Columbia tomorrow, and if you were there, would you go back?
Oh, absolutely, in a heartbeat. Not only would I push for these two proposals, but also the hate crime legislation that we're about 20 years overdue taking a look at.
What is the biggest difference between 20 years ago and right now when you think of hate crime?
I think the biggest difference across the country, we've seen a lot of other states adopt their own in-state hate crime legislation.
Okay.
As you know, South Carolina is only one of 5 states right now that do not have hate crime legislation on the books. And what we're missing there, unless a state, the importance of having hate crime legislation, unless a crime in the state goes federal, we lose a lot of data points with not having hate crime laws, because having hate crime laws allows law enforcement, is really a tool for law enforcement to track that. So if we say in County X, we're starting to see an uptick in people that are targeting folks based on race, gender, nation of origin, gender identity, homelessness. Right now, that's not tracked. We're not taking a look at that. So passing hate crime legislation in our state allows us, law enforcement, to get a handle on that and also direct resources when those problems pop up.
Let me turn to education. You said this quote, "I'm a fierce believer in the transformative power of public education, and I'm running to make sure that all South Carolina students have access to education. They need to become successful community leaders, business owners, and citizens of this great state. Currently, our school system is badly broken. We sit 43rd in education according to the United States national ranking, with just 38 of the residents holding college degrees. Teachers are leaving our schools, and in some cases, the profession entirely, in droves because of low pay and poor classroom conditions." I had to upgrade my voice because of the airplane there. But let me talk to you about this transformational power. What does that look like right now?
I'll say, education is the tide that raises all ships, and the national studies, we haven't moved very much really in the last 20 years. As far as our rankings, we tend to hover around the bottom. So rather than try to, I certainly can make a case that, hey, there's no question we're not doing what we need to be doing here. But I also want to look at this as an opportunity to improve, an opportunity to relook at the system and say, hey, how do we get higher on these rankings? But more importantly, how do we give our young folks an opportunity to succeed in life? So the transformational power is opening doors, quite frankly, the people. So education should be a vehicle to where when you leave the school system at 18 years old, or if you go back later through a vocational program or a 4-year degree in South Carolina, that you will immediately be employable. And that is not happening right now. Thankfully, we have a lot more attention to that issue because the teachers in the state have, quite frankly, stood up and said enough is enough. Our pay isn't good, our benefits aren't good, our classroom sizes are too big. And I really do think that fight needs to be teacher-led, and I'm looking forward when I get elected to be in helping amplify that voice for teachers. But going back to the point I was making is our employers are starting to get more vocal in the state too, saying that our high school graduate product isn't up to stuff. We've got to do a better job with that. So going back, overall, education should be transformative. We're not quite there.
You talk about teachers' pay. When you look at it right now, what should be increased and how?
Teacher pay. So the good news, I'll say with this, is the money is available. We this past year in our state budget, we ran $1 billion surplus. So we've got an extra $1 billion out there, and I think a very large portion of that should be going towards teacher pay and benefits. Because we all know, when you get involved in teaching, people do it for a passion, but you also have to be able to provide for your family. And it becomes, especially with Charleston becoming more expensive, if you're not able to provide for your family, there's only so long that your passion's going to keep you around.
What is the quality of life when you think of House District 114?
Yeah, so District 114 is, I'll say, largely a middle-class working district. The things that we've already kind of mentioned, education and infrastructure are probably the two biggest issues. People wanting more from their primary education, but also on the higher education side, if their children do decide to go to college. And I'll give a couple examples real quick. We, as a state legislator, has devalued funding higher education. So what happens there is those costs, when you move money out of supporting schools like the Citadel and College of Charleston here, those costs get passed back on to the students. So the first year for out-of-state tuition at the Citadel right now is $53,000 for a single year of college, which is crazy. It's a public school. It should not be that expensive, and it's incredibly limiting to people that want to get to that next level of education if they have to cough up $43,000 or go out there and take a loan, which really kind of handicaps them in their early formative work years of their life. So the issues for 114 primarily are I'll say our day-to-day building blocks that we need to focus on is education and infrastructure.
You talk obviously about the colleges, you talk about degrees and how expensive they are. Let me take you to the University of South Carolina. Obviously a new president is in place, but even before then there was controversy on his hiring. If you were in a state legislator right now, what would you do?
Yeah, so the decision has been made. I think we all certainly know that process could have been handled smoother. It was not, I think a lot of folks felt like they were left out of having a voice in that process, and if they were, then the next time that comes around, the state needs to respect. I'll also say, since the decision's been made, let's give the new president an opportunity to succeed. Hopefully he is working hard to prove a lot of his doubters wrong, but the decision's been made, and let's give this guy, this is our flagship university, an opportunity to succeed, and if he's not, let's be vocal about how he can do better.
Would you support taking the governor off of the board of trustees for all colleges and universities, public schools in the state of South Carolina?
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure that's needed. I think that would be, at this point, more of a knee-jerk reaction than anything. So I'm not sure if that going forward will improve our hiring process.
And as a disclaimer, I'm going to be interviewing your opponent, obviously, Lynn Bennett, later this week for Quintin School Sub. So looking forward to talking with her as well. But Ed, thank you so much for your time here on Quintin School Subs, and hope to have you back as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Quintin. Appreciate it.
Likewise.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.